I have people try and figure out their reason for reaching out to me. What's their why?
Mm-hmm.
And if that why is big enough, then they're going to really try hard to make changes.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Adapt You podcast. You listen to this podcast for one reason. You want to change. You have an area or areas in your life that you seek improvement and desire support in getting there. You wish to surround yourself with a community of like-minded people who are looking for clarity on who they are, what they want, and who they wish to become. You believe that the most fulfilling existence comes from the intentional, conditioned, and habitual act of learning, growing, and constantly evolving. You are here, my friends, because you've committed to a lifelong journey of becoming the absolute best version of yourself. You are here to adapt you. Diabetes, a crippling disease that is really taking the world by storm right now. I looked up some statistics before I brought our most recent guest on, who I'm about to introduce here in a minute. And it was actually blew my mind. The statistics stated that 9.3% of the world's population from the ages of 20 to 79 suffer from diabetes. That's 438 million people that suffer from diabetes. Then under the age of 20, another 1.1 million people suffer from type 1 diabetes, something they're sort of born with and have to learn to manage. And it is something that is affecting roughly 10% of the population. So it only made sense to have somebody on the show that can make an impact as it relates to diabetes. So I want to introduce to you today, Christy Jakes, who is a diabetes lifestyle coach and CEO of KJ Diabetes Lifestyle Coaching. She is extremely passionate about helping people live with diabetes and learn how to control it rather than the diabetes controlling them. She's been living with type 1 diabetes herself for over 37 years and knows firsthand of all the ups and downs, which she'll get into as she discusses her own personal experience. She has spent a lifetime working on improving her health with a strong focus on nutrition, which is going to be a big part of the show today. She's a past owner of a small town health food store and cafe, is a founder of an executive director of a non-for-profit, the Diabetes Wellness Council, has created and organized wellness expos, health fairs, and talks with experts in the field, and has even written and co-written a couple of books. Eartha Gets Well, a children's book that teaches young kids all of the information that she talks about every single day. And then Sweet Surrender, how to become your own best health advocate, where she tells her personal story about living with multiple health issues and either overcoming them completely or learning how to manage them in a more natural and effective way versus taking the pills and all of that our traditional healthcare system pushes on us every single day. Without good health, she says, everything else in life just gets harder. She has appeared on local television programs, radio programs, podcasts, newspapers, and magazines. And she simply just loves helping people and telling her story about diabetes and helping those with diabetes overcome it or manage it in a healthy way versus the traditional medicinal way. So please allow me to introduce today our guest. All right, everybody, I want you to welcome to the Adapt You podcast, Christy Jakes. Welcome to the show, Christy. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Derek, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So Christy is out in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's funny. I was actually just out there and we're just talking and joking a little bit a minute ago about the old gas shortage. So glad I was able to make it back. And it looks like Christy is going to be staying put for a little while since there's really no option unless you're driving a Tesla. As mentioned in the podcast intro, Christy is an absolute expert from her own journey and her own experience, her own teachings with her struggle with diabetes, something that really affects millions of Americans today. So I know this podcast will have a lot of relevance to those who are listening, whether it be yourself or loved ones. You know, my own mother has diabetes, recently diagnosed. So I'm anxious to hear what you have to say as it relates to this. And I know, Christy, that, based off your bio and the conversations we've had, a lot of this has really stemmed from your own personal journey of diabetes. And that's really where I wanted to start, was just to sort of learn, kind of walk us through your story. And we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper into that.
Absolutely. I was diagnosed 1983 with type 1 diabetes. I'm not going to tell you how old I was, because then you'll start doing the math, and nobody wants that.
Can you tell people the difference between type 1 and type 2? Because I know a lot of people get confused before you continue your story, because I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. Type 1 is where the pancreas just shuts down, stops working. My body can no longer produce the insulin it needs to convert food into fuel. Type 2, it used to be called adult onset because it happened later in life. But now we're seeing young kids developing type 2, and that's really sad. They say it's a lifestyle disease, but that's something we can talk about.
For sure.
Every person is different.
So is it fair to say that, because I think a lot of people see type 1 as being almost, these are the cards you were dealt, where type 2 is you dealt your own deck of cards. Back in the olden days, that was sort of how they separated the two, right? From poor lifestyle and eating decisions. Type 2 could sort of be brought about, right? Where
Right.
Type 1, it was more congenital potentially in nature, which I don't know if that's the case anymore, but that used to be sort of how they separated the two. Is
that was the way, but there's so many different things going on now that you can't categorize somebody as, saying, well, you did this, so that's why you have diabetes.
Yep. No, that's fair. So type 1 back in 1983.
Yes. I was not happy. I was experiencing all the symptoms. I had no idea what was going on. My mother, thank goodness, she knew what the signs were and took me to the doctor for blood work.
And what were those signs?
I was always thirsty. I was going to the bathroom all the time. I was tired, nauseous. I ran the gambit of symptoms. But she took me to the doctor and said that I was being tested for diabetes. I had no idea what that was. And I got really angry because the only person that I knew that had diabetes was our next door neighbor. And he was in a wheelchair, had both legs amputated. That was my experience with diabetes.
That's a scary thought at a young age. Yeah, you're staring at that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there were boxes of Twinkies and stuff all over their house. So, but that was my experience. So it took a while, but I finally learned to accept it. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks before they let me go home because I refused to give myself an insulin injection.
Oh, wow.
They brought in stuffed animals and oranges for me to practice on. And then one day my doctor came in with a syringe full of saline. He rolled up his sleeve and said, "Here, practice on me." That was the point where I said, okay. All right,
sure. This guy's crazy enough to let me stick a needle in his arm. This sounds like fun.
So I did that. I went home and took some adjustments, but here I am.
So here you are, so many years later, having learned the diagnosis at a young age and learning how to take insulin shots and measure everything. And I know there's new tools that exist today, which I know add some convenience to it, which we may get into in the discussion. But talk to me a little bit about what it's been like living with diabetes and sort of what you've learned in your journey to better manage it, because I really think that's where a lot of your work comes out of is through that personal experience. Like what have been some of the more challenging things you've learned to adjust through?
Well, some of the testing, I had to learn to test often for a while, especially before getting in a car,
Okay.
because sometimes the blood sugar can drop really low and you don't have a sense of what's going on. And I learned that the hard way because I totaled my car.
Oh, wow. Okay. So your blood sugar dropped and did you lose consciousness or just get dizzy or disoriented? And
I honestly, I don't even remember getting in my car.
oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, it
So
was
you had to start.
just something going on.
So that was now part of your new process, that before you got into a car, you made it a habit to check your blood sugar to ensure that you're in a safe position before you would drive, a motorized vehicle. Is that normal for diabetics, or is that just because of the experience that you had? Is that something they teach?
For the testing, that is something we teach
No
to test
kidding.
often to know where you are.
I was not aware of that. Now, how often do you have to test per day? Um,
Well, I was testing 6 to 8 times a day.
and that was with the finger prick, right?
Yes.
Now
And
that
after
must.
my car accident, I don't have to do that anymore. So I got some of the new equipment you're talking about.
So, which is great, and I'm anxious to talk about that. So you had you had a car accident. What other challenges were you faced with that I think some of the other diabetics who are listening might be able to relate to?
I've had severe highs. I get on the roller coaster.
Hmm.
If I'm having a really bad low, I'll overindulge in what I call my emergency Skittle stash. I'll overindulge and then I'll get too high and then I'll take too much insulin. And it's a constant roller coaster if you're not managing it properly. And that's exhausting.
I can imagine, right? Because as the blood sugar spikes and crashes, we've all, even diabetic or not, we've all had too much cake or too much sugar and have felt somewhat of the effects of a spike in blood sugar, and then naturally how it comes down. And yeah, it doesn't feel good. I would imagine from a diabetic's perspective, it's that much more severe. And we can somewhat control it better. Those who don't suffer from diabetes can have those regulators in place, right? Where you're regulating it with a needle.
Right.
And so walk me through that a little bit, because I have family that's diabetic, but I've never stopped to ask them, how often, as you have been going through this journey since '83, and maybe it's done differently now, but when you're using a needle, and I've also seen people that have insulin pumps. What's that? What's that process like? How hard was it to get adjusted to it, and then after a while, does it just become normalcy?
Yeah, well, there was a time that I didn't really pay attention. And I'm honestly shocked that I'm still here. But, I took my insulin dosage twice a day, like the doctor told me, but I didn't do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I was dosing correctly. I don't know anything. I didn't even test at a one point in my life. So when I got on a regular schedule and started really taking control, it became normal for me. to test my blood sugar. Oh, I need to do this. Oh, I need to go grab the emergency Skittles. I wanted to know where I was most of the time. So I knew how to schedule my day, plan my meals. And if I didn't want to eat a meal, then I knew I could lower my dosage or skip it altogether. So you always have to know your numbers.
Yeah, it seems like that's really what dictates how you're going to feel. And it sounds like in the beginning, maybe from what you described, maybe you took a little bit of a less disciplined approach in the beginning, and from that probably got less than desirable results in how you felt. And car accidents, and I'm sure there's probably a myriad of stories in there of situations and incidents that you had to deal with. And then like what made you get on the track? So like what made you say, all right, enough of this crap, like I'm sick of having all these issues? Like what was the point that got you to sort of change the way in which you were approaching diabetes, and really kind of cross over to the other side and taking control of it?
I was at work one day. I was a veterinary technician working for a big vet hospital. And I was doing my exam for the doctor on a puppy. And I took the puppy in the back, and I just kept walking around holding it for longer than I should have. And one of my coworkers said, aren't you supposed to be in the room with the clients? And at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, my blood sugar's low. And I thought, that could have been really bad. I could have dropped the puppy. I have no idea what could have happened. Like, I can't do this.
So you're just kind of like in a fog. Like sometimes when I go to the pantry and I go in the kitchen, I'm like, what? And I'm walking around, I'm like, why am I here? So, but at a more severe level, naturally, right? Where you're just sort of subconsciously just moving, but not really totally with it.
Yeah.
So you had that moment with this puppy, and then what did you do? Like what was, let's talk about sort of your new approach as we segue into that, as you go from the dark side to the light side of diabetes for you. What action did you take personally, before we get into what you do to help others, to turn around?
Well, that's when I started really testing more frequently. And I decided to go for the insulin pump. And I did that for a while. And that
can you explain what that is to everybody, the insulin pump?
The insulin pump, basically, it kind of acts like a pancreas. You schedule how much you're going to get throughout the day. It gives you small amounts. And the one that I used back then had the long tubing that went underneath the skin,
mm-hmm.
and an electronic device. And
it almost looked like a pager almost, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, I've seen them.
Yeah, but the problem with that one particular model was I toss and turn at night, and I ended up breaking the line several times, and my blood sugar would go over 600 because I wasn't getting any insulin.
Okay. So you did that for a little while, and then it sounds like you retreated from that.
Yeah, I went back to the insulin injections, and recently I switched to a new pod or pump that there's no tubing involved.
Mm-hmm.
It just sticks to me, and I change it every 3 days.
Is that the thing that goes on the back of the arm?
That's a monitor.
Oh, okay. So what's the new pod exactly?
Well, it's a little square, kind of square, with a very strong adhesive,
Okay.
and it has. Trying to find it. It has a device that controls it.
Okay.
I can put in what my numbers are, what my blood sugar is. I can tell it how many carbohydrates I'm about to eat, and it will calculate the dosage.
Oh, and you stick this strong adhesive somewhere on your body,
Yeah.
and it doses out the insulin based off what you're telling it it's about to eat to keep you sort of balanced out.
Right.
That's fascinating. And then so you went from, the old fashioned way, we'll call it, to the needles, to the pump, back to the needles, and now you use this device as well.
Yeah.
And I know there's also that monitoring device that goes on the back of your arm. My uncle actually has that to be able to tell you what your levels are, so he doesn't have to do the finger prick, which I know I gotta imagine. My wife, we had to do a finger prick test the other day, just do a food sensitivity test and put blood on a card. And you would have thought that like we cut her fingers off and we're holding her hostage because she was sweating and bleeding, or not even bleeding, sweating profusely, and like was nauseous just from squeezing a little bit of blood out of her finger. And she was like, if I was a diabetic, I would just die. She's like, there's no way I could do that. I was like, well,
Not true.
I'm like, you learn to adapt, right? Because
Yeah.
you have to. So now that you're doing these new methods, you got everything under control. Talk to me a little bit about what you're doing to help others through this challenge, because I think that's really, a big reason why we brought you on the show, because I think it's important to understand how through your journey and through your struggle and your pain and through your learning experiences, you've been born into this role where you're helping others. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, most of my clients are type 2.
Okay.
So I am a diabetes lifestyle coach.
Okay.
And
so let's break that down. So if I am type 2 and I'm your client, how are you helping me?
well, we start off with a consultation to kind of see what your starting point is, what your goals are. I go over a list of medications and what you do on a regular basis, like food, exercise, sleep, mood. There's so many different things that go into diabetes management, especially stress, because stress can either shoot it up or drop it.
Okay.
And exercise, same way.
So exercise can affect it in either way as well. Really, I was not aware of that. Okay.
Yeah, especially like really intensive exercise, because that stresses the body.
I see.
But of course, once you get adapted to doing that intensive exercise, your body kind of figures it out.
Okay. So you do an analysis of their medications. You take a look at all the multifactorial parts of it. Okay. And then what?
Favorite foods. So then we can adjust to make healthier versions. There's a lot of information out there about being vegan to help type 2 diabetes or help diabetics in general.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I have tried every type of diet there is. I mean, all of them. And you have to find the way of eating that works for you.
Everyone's different.
Everyone is so different. And, I can't eat all the grains and the beans and all this stuff because those have carbohydrates and they raise my blood sugar, especially rice. I love rice and I can't eat it. But, vegan didn't work for me. I do vegetarian on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've tried all these different things, but I like to encourage clients to do their own thing, try what works for them. Maybe it's portion control. Maybe they have a unknown food allergy or a sensitivity to something.
Mm-hmm.
So I urge them to keep a journal of what they ate, how they felt, what their numbers were. And that kind of gives them an idea too and holds them accountable.
Absolutely. It allows you to review something with them.
Exactly.
So, okay. So you help them with, it sounds like, if I'm somebody that comes to the table with type 2 diabetes, it's usually late for most people. Type 2, it's a later in life type of a situation, right? So I'm accustomed to living a certain way, eating what I want, doing what I want, exercise how I want. Then all of a sudden it's like, boom, I'm hitting the face with type 2. So, what a tremendous service, because, you're really having to break some old habits and bad habits for a lot of people. And that's got to be pretty challenging for some. It's very challenging. So, how do you sort of help them? How do you help them through that? When people come to you, are they usually at their breaking point? Are they more receptive, or are they coming to you early in their diagnosis, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. And honestly, I have people try and figure out their reason for reaching out to me. What's their why?
Mm-hmm.
And if that why is big enough, then they're going to really try hard to make changes.
Yeah, and that why, I can imagine, could be something like they want to see their grandkids grow up, or they something, not just I want to feel better, right? There needs to be, although that's a great reason, it needs to be rooted in something a little stronger, an overall, right? Something attached to an emotion, because otherwise people often aren't going to take the respective action. I was curious if sometimes people just came to you because they were referred by a physician or a past client, and how receptive they are, to the idea of changing everything. And I would imagine you don't really change everything. You're really looking to tweak certain things, because, like you said, everyone's different, right? So some people respond differently. So what's that like, working with such a disease that it can really change, can manifest differently in one person versus another, right? Where the formula may work for John Doe, but maybe not Jane Smith. Like how do you approach that?
Well, honestly, I get to know the person. I try to communicate with them as much as possible and form a relationship. So I know more about them. And when I know more about them and they start sharing more often and they trust me, then they'll share more, and we can dig deep into different roadblocks. Because there may be something, that they haven't told me prior. But as we go along, it's a journey. And each step on the roadmap, you find, well, this doesn't work. So let's, take this exit here and try something different.
And it sounds like it's a very versatile role, right? Because you're dealing with people's exercise, their nutrition, their psychosis, right? Their psychology. So you're wearing the hat of many different counselors or coaches at the same time, which is a big responsibility, in identifying that, because, like you said, just the stress of our own thoughts, stress of what we're holding on to, past pains, whatever the case may be. It's amazing. As I've had the opportunity to interview some folks that really dive deep into that on this podcast, and it's amazing the effect on the body. And stress alone can have a profound effect on diabetes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. And I don't think that there's enough emphasis placed on that as it relates to the management of the disease, and any disease. for that nature. So, now with your clients, how do you typically interact with them? Is it via Zoom, or a lot of them face to face, or with the phone, like a combination of everything?
Well, I started out, person to person, like in person in my office, which I closed April of last year because we couldn't do any more in person, and the clients that I had did not want to do Zoom. So no income meant no rent.
Makes
So
sense.
I'm working from home, doing Zoom or phone calls or Skype, whatever they prefer.
That's good. As everyone's kind of had to go through a bit of a transition to more of this digital phase now. We all just talk on Zoom. So that's good, because it's a great service. It's a great, especially again, for those people who have type 2. I know people, my family, who were diagnosed with type 2, and it's because of, some of it's pretty clear. It has to do with how they've treated their bodies up to that point. So can you talk a little bit about the prevention of diabetes as it relates to those who are maybe on the cusp, right? They have the blood work, they're getting close. They're pre-diabetic, is that term we often hear thrown around. What are some of the changes that you could recommend to individuals like that to stop that from happening? And I would imagine there are very similarly the same things you recommend to your clients who have diabetes, from that perspective.
Yeah, again, I take a look at what they're eating and if they're getting any movement in. I am a lifestyle coach for the diabetes prevention program through the CDC, and they talk about food, exercise constantly in that program.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, their goal is for people to lose, I think, 5% of their body weight through the program, but not everybody in the program is overweight. Type 2 doesn't have to mean that you're overweight or obese. Now, it doesn't work. So I'm trying to get people to really lower carbohydrates just a little bit, because a baked potato or a cup of rice is going to do the same thing to me as a Snickers bar. It's exactly the same. It all turns to sugar in the body. So if people understand that, then maybe they would start making a few changes. Fill up your plate with lots of leafy greens and non-starchy vegetables, some lean protein. That's my meal.
That's a great meal. So
Yeah.
you're obviously the we'll call it the sugar, which is often, with, as it relates to diabetes, it comes in a variety of different fashions, right? Everyone thinks of Snickers bars, but glucose those carbohydrates get broken down appropriately. So as you said, those starchy vegetables, I think it's important for people to understand, like, the diets are not the same for everybody, but do you have a diet that you generally recommend for people? Is it more of to sort of quote a fad diet, more of a ketogenic diet where it's more based off, proteins, and I mean,
Yeah.
ketogenic is like no sugar, no carbs, but something leaning more in that direction?
I mean, that's what I follow personally.
Yep.
But again, I personalize, protocol for each client. Because, if I tell somebody they got to eat this way, they don't like some of the foods, they're not going to follow it.
And not everyone responds, as you said, to foods the same. Right? What is good for you is poison to somebody else. I actually just took a food sensitivity test, and I was wild to find out what my body has a very negative reaction to. For me, it was grains.
Yep. Gluten.
And dairy. So what's weird is that when I eat grains and dairy, I don't get a stomach ache. Like I'll kill a pizza and I feel totally fine. Right. In fact, I feel quite satisfied. And tomatoes actually was another one.
Yeah.
So I definitely can't have pizza, but the way my body reacts to it is through widespread inflammation. So joints start hurting, tendons, and it has this prolific effect on me from that food. So with a diabetic, do you, I know you keep a journal. Do you ever recommend food sensitivity testing so that there's an understanding of maybe some of the sensitivities that they're having with like an IgG response?
I haven't done the testing yet. I haven't recommended it. I tell people to try something or eliminate something for 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and then slowly introduce it back and see how they respond.
And see how they feel. And that's a great way of doing it because you'll know.
It's a lot cheaper than the test.
Yes, true. The test can get rather expensive.
And you can have pizza.
Well, I have, so the cauliflower pizza, the cauliflower crust is quite delicious, but then it's like, I have to have a cauliflower crust with like a cashew cheese. And I've tried it and it just being from New York and having New York style pizza is just not the same. So once the inflammation is more under control, then I'll, just every once in a while, I'll have a slice to cheat, because for me, it's just management of inflammation. As you get a little bit older, you start caring about that type of stuff. Where when I was younger, I just ate whatever I wanted. So from the perspective of exercise, so you talk about diet, you talk about reducing mental stress, and then that other big prong of it being exercise. How do you help clients with the introduction of exercise into their routine, and how resistant are they typically to it? Do you find that people that have diabetes and they've now hired you, are they willing to do the work? And have you seen it and make improvements in how they feel?
Oh, I've had clients, when we could hug, they'd come in my office and give me the biggest hug ever because they just saw their doctor and saw their numbers and got off their medications. And, I've had clients bring me gifts because they've done so well. Those are the people who really, really took it to heart. And they listened to me. They made some mistakes, but, that's okay because we all do.
We all do.
Yeah. But there have been people, actually, I've heard this from some of the doctors, a podiatrist that refers to me. And he said he talked to a patient about blood sugar numbers and how they really got to get it under control, or they're going to have to amputate some toes. And they're like, well, I have 8 or 9 more. It's okay.
Some people just, no matter how grave the situation, they don't want to change. We all have that breaking point where we're like, enough is enough. Some people that's just pre-diabetic. They're like, oh, I don't want that. Right. They see that person in the wheelchair missing toes or limbs. And some people it's, you see those people outside smoking a cigarette with the oxygen tank. They clearly don't care. They're going to continue to do what they do because they're stubborn and set in their ways. And that's what's the fascinating thing to me about change. And that's why I ask a lot of questions around it is I'm always curious as to what you see, what types of, how willing these people are to adjust to your advice.
Look into the spectrum.
I would think so. Yeah. Just like with anything else. So a couple more questions for you. We've had the opportunity to bring some folks on who speak about diabetes and speak about a method specifically for type 2, somewhat of an aggressive method to try to get rid of it, to just remove diabetes. And that's through aggressive water only supervised fasting, right? So the idea and the concept that you're eating and that stress is really what has caused the disease in your body. And And when you continue to bombard yourself with that, with those foods and that unhealthy lifestyle, your body never has a chance to repair, right? And diabetes is a signal to say like, hey, you're hurting us here. So when we finally stop eating and we fast, and there's Dr. Goldhammer, True North Health Clinic out of California, speaks about it, where he's had tremendous success with people coming with type 2 diabetes. They go on these long fast, 3, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, water only, and they leave. They're not diabetic anymore, no more medications, and they're fine. They go back to a what he calls a SOS diet, which I'm not sure exactly what it stands for, but it's basically like no salt, no oil, and it's all leafy greens and like fish and fruits and stuff like that. And so kind of how we're meant to eat. What's your opinion on that? Have you had any experience with that with any of your clients?
I've done fasting, and I do intermittent fasting a lot. I haven't done anything as aggressive as the water only fast, because when you're doing low carb, sorry, my insulin pump is going crazy. When you're low carb, your body's, releasing electrolytes.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to replenish that. And as a type 1, the longest I've done so far is 48 hours. And people are like, well, how do you do that? I'm like, well, my glucose monitor, my insulin pump. If I'm not going to eat anything, I can turn the insulin pump off for a couple hours. But if you do fasting for, I think it's 3 days, that resets your immune system. So the water fast, I think that's a little, like you said, aggressive. I don't know that any of my clients around here would be up for that, because they have a hard time skipping breakfast.
Yeah,
and the doctor here keeps saying you need to eat 45 to 60 grams of carbs per meal, plus snacks at 15. You need to eat 3 meals a day plus 2 snacks. And so the doctors, they're getting it wrong. And it drives me crazy. I had a client that was severely overweight. She was insulin resistant and on 3 different diabetes medications. The doctor still recommended that many carbs, that many meals per day.
It's like the standard response, right? Versus something that's custom tailored, where you can come in and give them a bit more custom guidance, because
right.
Clearly overeating with that particular client's an issue. So we need to make some adjustments.
There's a disconnect.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's such a service that you're offering to folks, because as people transition from the clinician's office to back into the real world, they need guidance. They need help, right? It's like trying to walk again, trying to change the way you eat, the way you think, the way you're moving. Start moving if you haven't moved at all. That's a lot of stuff to swallow all at once, right? It's a total like flip the world upside down on its head. You're there for a reason. Now I got to go the other way. Like, it's hard. So I think it's great what you're doing. Tell me, how can people who are listening right now, who are in need of some of services like yours, to get your counseling, to get that customized coaching, how can they get in contact with you?
Well, I have a website. It's ChristyJakes.com.
And spell Jakes for me. Can you spell that all out? Because it does actually not spelled how you would think it was spelled. So
it is not spelled that way. It's spelled JACQUES.
And the first name is Christy, KRISTII. Yes. So Christy Jakes, we'll put it in the show notes so that people have the ability to see it and get in contact with you. Christy, one last question for you. We went over a lot of things today. You sort of talked about your journey. You talked about your experience, your pain and dealing with it. The fact that you probably may not have been the most compliant person if you were with a coach in the beginning, because you kind of did your own thing until you held that dog and and we're kind of, walking in circles around in a room to realize it was time to make a change. So now here you are, completely other side of the rainbow, and you're helping people sort of find their pot of gold and get there, find their way through diabetes in their journey. You went over a lot of stuff. And for some, it could be too much to consume. If people were listening right now, so just take away one thing that you said today, or maybe that you didn't say as it relates to what you do in diabetes, and they walk away with one bit or nugget of information to improve themselves, what would you suggest? What would you give them? One thing.
Just be aware of what you're doing. Awareness is everything.
So by that, meaning that a lot of us are just sort of skating through doing the same habits, and we're just not even realizing the damage that we're causing to ourselves.
Right.
So awareness, that's powerful, because a lot of us, I think you would agree, we get caught in these ruts, and we get this subconscious pre-programming, and we just do the same thing over and over and over and expect a different result. Right.
Right.
Yeah. I think Einstein called that the definition of insanity. So, that sage wisdom, just becoming aware. And I think hopefully that wakes a few people up that are listening. And please reach out to Christy if you're somebody that's in need of these services and it's in need of coaching and counseling. She is obviously a rock star with it, with her own personal experience as well. So thank you so much, Christy, for coming on the show today. We really greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Now go tend to that insulin pump.
Absolutely.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Adapt You podcast today. Our goal with this show and all of our content is to deliver you the guests and the respective knowledge necessary to help you change something in your life. Everyone who listens to this show has something they want to affect and something they want to change. And our goal is to help give you the knowledge necessary to take you down that path on becoming the absolute best version of yourself. If you like what you heard today, please tune in to all of our shows and also check us out in social media. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and check out our website and have some great content on there as well. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next show.